Thank you very much, Rita. I'm very pleased to be here. I think this might be a bit of a different presentation than what you're used to, but let's see if it'll be useful for you. I do hope so. So as Rita said, my name is David Pollard. I'm the Executive Director of Workplace Pride Foundation. And the foundation, as you can see, we are a member-based nonprofit foundation based here in Amsterdam, actually. We work with many different multinationals as well as universities, a couple of universities. And basically, we deal with LGBT workplace inclusion. And I know you heard this yesterday, but just to be clear, that's lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender, and intersex inclusion in the workplace. And I emphasize that so clearly because I was just looking out this morning at some of the presentations of the various participants of the conference, and I did not see LGBT mentioned once. There was some mentions of sexual orientation and inclusiveness, but it struck me that I did not see LGBT, and I think that's kind of at the core of what we try to do, is to make sure that LGBT is also visible in any type of diversity and inclusion effort. It's very important that we, the LGBT community, can actually see ourselves recognized in any type of promotion. So I've left that up there on purpose, as you can see that these are very big companies in most cases, and they take the topic of LGBTI inclusion quite seriously. These are all multinational, well, not all of them, but most of them are multinationals, including the Dutch government is a member of our foundation. Just one word about myself so you know what I'm all about. I actually worked in the corporate world for 20 years, and I started the LGBT employee network at my last employer, ING, about 15 years ago, and the foundation grew out of that. So, as you can see here, our mission statement is we are dedicated to improving the lives of LGBTI people in the workplace. That's the core of what we do. We do it in many different ways, with publications, etc. You see there our magazine, New Horizons. I've actually brought a couple of copies if you'd like to see them later on. But basically, we do anything we can to focus on the topic of LGBT inclusion, because it simply hasn't been spoken enough about. You see many changes in the legislative environment, some changes in social environments, but not enough in the workplace. So as you can see here, we provide all types of tools for civil society, for governments, and for businesses to get together and talk about this and make progress. We are a connector, as it were. There we go. Okay, so now why is this so important? Why is LGBTI inclusion in the workplace so important? As you can see, we all spend 35% of our lives at work. I mean, that's not insignificant. People want to be able to be themselves. They want to be able to contribute at work because it's such an important part of your life. But we have found through our own research that if LGBTI people cannot be themselves at work, they are 30% less productive. Now, that's really quite significant if you think about it. If you have to come to work and you have to use a different pronoun, instead of saying my husband, I say, well, my girlfriend, that takes energy away from your workplace. It makes you not as good of a team player. It simply takes too much of the energy that should be devoted to work. And one of our basic underlying ideas or principles is that the energy you're having to use to hide who you are should be devoted to your work. And if that can be the case, then you're helping yourself, first of all. It's like a weight lifted off your shoulders, but you're also helping your employer. So if you look at it from an employer's perspective, having LGBTI people out at work and creating an environment for them to be out is better for them as well. And I believe that applies to any university as well. We'll talk about that in a moment again, but from a recruitment standpoint, from a research standpoint, if LGBTI people have an environment where they can really be themselves, they're going to be much more effective across the board. So I believe that you had a presentation yesterday, I understood, from ILGA, the International Gay and Lesbian Association. You may have seen this already, but you're seeing it again now. And it's striking, even to me, every time I see it, the differences in the world when it comes to LGBTI inclusion. And this is based upon the legal differences. So you can see most of the Americas, Western Europe, is relatively good. I say relatively because there are always cases in every country where it isn't good. But at least the general population, LGBTI population, can feel safe. But you can see in much of the rest of the world, it is not. In the Middle East, I could not stand here on this stage and say I'm a gay man without fear of being imprisoned or even worse. So that's something to stand still at for a moment and say, why is this the case? And you'll see in a moment that this is very important from an employer standpoint as well, because they employ people all over the world. Just as I heard in the previous presentation, mobility is a key issue. If you cannot, as an LGBT person, move readily across the world, that's a problem for you and your employer. I want to point out also that this is May 2017, and things are changing quickly for both the good and the bad. Since this was published, Australia has granted same-sex marriage. Costa Rica has done the same. Taiwan is about to vote on it. And the last was, of course, India, which has overturned Article 377, decriminalizing homosexuality. These are major steps. It's moving in the right direction, but it's not there yet. So, the dilemma that our members face, and I believe that you probably face as well, is those organizations that are globally active, internationally active, often will have a diversity and inclusion policy throughout the world. But when it comes to actually implementing that in a local basis, you're dealing already with different legal environments or frameworks, different cultural environments. So how do you go about doing this? What do you do? Measure it, as you can see at the bottom, and that's what we have done with Workplace Pride. So I'm actually here to speak today about the global benchmark. Now, we put together the Workplace Pride Global Benchmark about 6 years ago together with the University of Leiden here. So we tried to create a scientifically based structure of measurement for employers, mainly multinationals that you saw earlier. Any organization can take part in the global benchmark, but we designed it for them. The benchmark is it's an online survey. It's about 40 questions, and it's information that's provided by the organizations themselves, and we measure it, we judge it. Again, as scientifically as possible. The outcome, as you can see from last year, these are the organizations, IBM, Dow, Shell, and Accenture, who are really taking huge strides when it comes to LGBT inclusion. IBM has been working with this issue for 30 years, actually, so they've understood a long, long time ago that it is very important to include it in the entire breadth of diversity and inclusion. Yes, there's gender inclusion, ethnicity, disabled as well, but also LGBT inclusion. It has to be called out. It has to be, we have to be able to recognize ourselves, the LGBT community. It's quite encouraging each year to see the organizations take part in the survey. And what they do, to go into a little bit more detail about the survey itself, we designed it so that it would be palatable by management in organizations, because these are the people that we really wanted to influence. So you can see here that we broke the results of the survey down into 7 different sections. These are the sections that in an organization, I know that, having worked in the corporate world for so long, are quite important, and it's language that the management of these organizations understand. When you're talking about policy and communication or workplace awareness, these are things that can be changed within organizations, and this is why we did it the way we did. And so the results, as you can see here in 2017, when it comes to policy and communication and employee networks, they're not doing too bad, those organizations that took part in this survey. That's good, so they can talk about it. But when it comes to actually doing something about it, they're not doing as well. As you can see here, support and benefits is really pretty low. So if you're an LGBT person working in a company and the company's talking about it on one side that they're supportive, and on the other side, well, there isn't really the insurance for my girlfriend if I'm a woman, or for my husband if I'm a man, that's a problem. It's really a problem. And again, I go back to the mobility issue. If I cannot go with my husband to another country because that country isn't legal, It's a problem, and the company needs to be proactive in doing something about that. So that was the global overview. Individual participating organizations get this. This is, of course, a model. We try to break it down and also do a trend analysis over the years. So they're starting with a benchmark. They're starting with a baseline that they can then measure their policies against. And I actually think this is a quite healthy thing for any organization to do, frankly, on any D&I topic. You have to start someplace and measure, and I'm sure with this audience, you do this, you measure, but you need to also do it for the LGBT inclusion. It's difficult sometimes to identify our community. We're hidden often. Not every gay man wears a tie, but we're there. We're definitely there. And the more active you can be to measure it, to find out what you can do, the better it will be. So we give both qualitative and quantitative advice to the organizations that take part in this so that they can help move it along and ultimately improve the situation in the workplace for our community. So our most recent findings are, and this is from our 2018, this is the one that's just now coming out, in fact we're releasing it in a couple of weeks, is that there still needs to be work done on support and benefits. This is something that's reoccurring. Also with monitoring, it is difficult, and we recognize that it's difficult to know who is LGBTI within your organization. But there are ways to do it, and we can help also through peer help, actually. Our various member organizations help each other to find out, so they're not having to reinvent the wheel. And again, employee networks are very crucial because this is the grassroots effort that helps inform the rest of the organization what they can do and how to best work with the LGBTI community. But how can we do this all together? And this is one of the key factors for workplace pride. So we have been involved with a number of multinational or international institutions, including the United Nations. 2 years ago, we were requested to take part in a consultation from the United Nations Office of the High Commissioner of Human Rights about this very topic, because they realize also that the workplace can also, or businesses, can often be those bodies that can do the most to change. Yes, there are governments, yes, there's cultural change, but businesses can change things immediately and sometimes quite a bit more efficiently. So they have put into place the United Nations Standards of Conduct for Business for LGBTI people. It's really quite revolutionary if you think about it, that a supranational like the United Nations is diving into this because they see how important it is. And you can see here the 5 standards of conduct that they're looking for. I won't read them all out, but it's quite comprehensive. And I believe, again, that universities and any type of research institute or anybody dealing with STEM, for that matter, can take these and apply them to their own activities as well. It does make a difference in the way that your organization is positioned, but also to the people that you want to recruit or attract or deal with. The other thing that we're doing, it's a little bit newer, is you might recognize the United Nations Sustainability Development Goals, the SDGs. What you might not know, though, is that LGBT was specifically not mentioned in the Sustainability Development Goals. Because it's the United Nations, because there were certain countries that said we don't accept LGBT people. So what we are doing right now is we're pulling the 3 categories that we have determined together with a number of other institutions where LGBT should be part of. We're creating a manifesto and we're going to be asking organizations to sign up to this manifesto, supporting the whole concept of including LGBTI inclusion with their other SDGs. And from a corporate organizational standpoint, often you'll have a diversity inclusion officer or department and a corporate sustainability officer or department. What we're trying to do is bring those 2 together and create much more critical mass to actually make the change that we're looking for. So how is this relevant for this audience, for your schools or organizations? I've said it already a little bit, but this does, if you can include LGBTI people and topics in what you're doing, it does promote more inclusive environments for your faculty, for your students, for anybody dealing with you. And it is definitely an untapped pool of talent. I can say this because I'll talk about it in a moment here, that we have actually created a program called Tech at Workplace Pride, dealing specifically with LGBTI people who are technically oriented, but don't feel like that they get the type of support that they require. This came from them, by the way, not from us. So it's really very much from the heart. And like I said, the LGBTI community is really organizing itself already. There already exist organizations for engineers, for scientists in the United States. I know of a couple. There's some in the UK as well, to bring them together to talk about being both technically oriented as well as being LGBTI. And this isn't exclusive in this sense. Everybody is welcome to this conversation, but it has to happen. I actually know this quite well because my own husband is an engineer. He's an LGBTI nerd, but it's important to get this topic on the conversation. So, as I mentioned, Tech at Workplace Pride, we have three programs within, specific programs within Workplace Pride. One is for women. One is for young people, young LGBT people going into the workplace or already in the workplace who need that support, and then for tech. And just last week at Brainport, which is it's kind of like the Silicon Valley of the Netherlands for those of you that know it, we had a relatively large LGBTI event working with a number of the multinationals you can see here, ASML, IBM, Philips, etc., including 2 universities, who recognize that this is a topic that needs to be brought onto the table and to enable to connect people. Again, I don't want to present this as something negative. This is a positive thing. Workplace Pride always works towards constructive engagement. And this is what we want to do with this as well. It's actually quite exciting to be able to open up these worlds to different people. So my last word here, I want to leave you with this, is that companies that engage in pro-LGBT advocacy perform better on various measures of business. Competitiveness compared with their peers and based on self-reported factors. This is actually from the Economics Intelligence Unit. So it's something that's very well known, and I encourage you when you go back to your own organizations to go back with the idea of yes, let's include LGBT. Even if it's a small factor, do include it. It's important, and use those words, LGBT or lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender. It's cheap. It won't cost you much. But if you make that effort, it means everything to our community. Thank you.
Hi, I would like to open now for some questions for David. Could we have a Chris? Could we have a microphone to the back?
Thank you. Thank you, David, for the presentation. This is Joanna Biza. I came from Barcelona, and I am a woman and minorities coach. You show us that you have been supporting big companies with 1,000 of employees. My question is, how can you convince the small or less big companies to go in your program and to some kind of studies?
Yes.
Thank you.
Well, actually, you touched upon something that's been a challenge for us as well as for the entire 12 years that we've been around. The large companies, they do have the resources to be able to do more, and we recognize that. So they are often leading with the entire topic of LGBT inclusion in the workplace. Smaller companies are much harder, I will admit that. SMEs, in particular throughout Europe, since SMEs are actually the backbone of the European economy, it's a challenge for us. What we try to do is provide an example by working with the large organizations. But I'll be very honest with you, we have not been that successful so far. The same problem applies to the really small organizations, the very small people. Often these organizations, they want to do something, but they come back and they say, well, we don't have the resources. And my answer to that is, again, it does not take a whole lot of resources. You don't have to join Workplace Pride. You can very easily just put a policy in place or communicate about it. If your CEO or if any type of leader within the organization stands up either via online media or in a town hall type meeting and simply says everyone should be able to be themselves at work. If they're a woman, if they're disabled, if they're dyslexic, if they're from an ethnic minority, or if they're LGBT. Simply calling it out is already a first step in the right direction.
Yeah. It's what we saw actually yesterday. There was empowering role models.
Yes.
So have role models be vocal and their place of work. It's probably halfway there.
Absolutely. I mean, if you can get sponsorship, somebody at the highest level within your organization, even for small organizations, that really sends a signal to everybody else. Actually, when the Technical University Delft joined our foundation, it was the rector herself who really supported it, and that trickled throughout the rest of the organization, that LGBT is a topic to be able to talk about. So hopefully over time it will help for SMEs as well.
One more question up here in the front, Chris.
Hi, my name is Ella Ghosh. I'm from Norway, from a Norwegian committee that works with gender balance and diversity. I was interested in what you said about the energy used and the lack of, also the effect it has on people at work to stay as quiet as possible about their sexual identity. But isn't the other side of that harassment if you are open? What are your figures on harassment at workplaces, and do you know anything about academic working places? Because our working places are very open and tolerant and all that in Norway. There's a lot of acceptance for persons who are LGBT, but harassment still occurs among students, for example.
For LGBT students?
Beg your pardon?
It occurs for LGBT students, harassment.
As well, I think.
Yes?
Yeah.
Yes. Well, yeah, this is not a foreign topic either, frankly. But it's still very much the responsibility of the organization to put the mechanisms in place so that cannot happen. So just having, coming to work and be able to, be open about who you are, what you are, can really only happen if the environment has been created for it to happen. And so that environment, in my opinion at least, should also have some type of mechanism for harassment. It can be hotlines. Most of the businesses you saw here have LGBTI hotlines, so that if there is some type of harassment, that there is at least somebody to contact. And I believe that merely having that mechanism in place already sends a signal, and also communicating about it, sends a signal to the entire organization that this is a no-go zone, that you cannot harass people based upon their sexual orientation or gender identity. But yeah, again, it's a journey, and it takes time to change these things. But it takes the courage of both the individuals to come out at work, but also the organization to say we're not going to allow them to be harassed through policy and through constant communication.
Absolutely. Over there.
Thank you for taking an additional question. Again, Harvey Fields, Washington University in St. Louis, and I'm the Assistant Dean for Student Success there. My question is, I like the rubric that you have developed for evaluating organizations and et cetera. What I want to know is, do you have partnerships with organizations in the United States, and so that they are embracing the approach that you are taking? And can you comment on that work?
In the United States?
In the United States, yes.
Actually, there are 3 or 4 organizations worldwide that do similar work to what we do. In the United States, there are actually a couple. One is Out and Equal. It's a very large organization, and they work with businesses and have been doing so for also quite a few years. In the UK, there's Stonewall. Stonewall is both from a societal standpoint as well as a workplace standpoint. Luckily, the world is very big, so we don't see it as a competitive issue. There are so many workplaces around the world that need to address this topic, that we try to work as closely as we can with these organizations. I want to mention also, that's just in the States, but here in Europe, there's an organization in Germany called Proud at Work. In France, there's L'Autre Cercle. So there are a number of other organizations that actually do this type of work.
Interesting. One more question? Thank you. It's fine.
Not working. Not working.
Hello.
There you go.
That's
There you
right.
go.
Okay, thanks. I'm Constance, Chief Diversity Officer of the University of Maastricht. And I was wondering, you had from your own research the indication that if LGBT employees are not able to come out, that they're 30% less productive. And now you also said that you're working with universities, so you have comparable numbers for students who are not able to come out, whether this has an influence on dropout rates and study success.
No, we don't. I wish that we did. But this research, which is actually done by a number of agencies together, including the Flemish government, the Dutch research arm, the SCP, as well as the Fundamental Rights Agency from the European Union, are focusing on the workplace, and not so much. It needs to be done. In fact, if anything, I would like to see that type of initiative coming out of this today, that students, in fact, the entire academic environment, students, faculty, and staff, for that matter, should have some type of underlying research to help them to make change, to make that type of change. But unfortunately, we don't have that yet.
Working on it.
Okay. Any more questions from the floor? One more.
Hi, I'm April Robertson from Skills Development Scotland. I wondered if you could say something about the support to young people, particularly given that many of them are in small and medium enterprises and are often quite isolated.
Did you say sport? I'm sorry?
No.
I didn't understand.
Supporting.
Supporting young
for
people.
young people.
Okay. Well, like I mentioned, we have a program called Young at Workplace Pride. It has two very interesting elements. It's speaking, first of all, to young people coming from schools or universities into the workplace, because our research, unfortunately, has shown that up to 70% of young people go back into the closet when they go into the workplace, which is shocking if you think about it. So what we try to do to address this situation is we advise our members on how to actually make it quite clear to LGBT people that they can be out when they come in. This is through the recruitment process. It's simply putting on your website, someplace where it's not buried within the website, that we are an LGBTI-friendly organization. Simply, mentioning those letters means everything to us. That's why I was looking here through all these signs outside and didn't see it anywhere. Mm-hmm. And that's quite an important thing. For young people, it means everything. So it's a question of businesses changing their side, but also for the students themselves, of course. They do research anymore, and millennials, I didn't put it up here so much, but millennials are picky. They will go to a place where they're going to be able to be themselves. And by the way, this is not just LGBT millennials, it's all millennials. And millennials will also go to businesses, universities, etc., where they can feel that they can be themselves. And LGBT people are often, it's kind of like the pink canary in the coal mine. If an organization can embrace LGBT people, the sign is to everybody that they will embrace everybody else as well.
Absolutely.
I have time for a very, very quick
Of course you
anecdote. Years ago, IBM, one of our members, was having an LGBT recruitment event in Tokyo, of all places. And they were shocked to see so many women coming to this event. And I said, how can it be that there are so many Japanese lesbians that are coming to the event to want to work here? And so they started asking, and it turned out that they were not necessarily lesbians, but they wanted to go to a place where they knew that they would be accepted. And the mere fact that IBM was opening this up to LGBT people, it was quite clear to them that lesbians
Everyone
would also
was welcome
be very much
then.
at home.
Yeah, absolutely. Very interesting. Thank you, David.
Yeah.